All right, guys. So some of you were away when we did literary value, and that happens to be a really important concept for your exam. So today I'm just going to do a really quick overview of literary value so that you can watch it and come back to class, and then we can continue on with it and you're not left behind. So literary value, this is a term that's really important for you to wrap your head around so that you're able to do your exam. For something to be literary, it means that it is a written text. Okay, it can also be referred to as literature. Any written text, such as plays, novels, poems, song lyrics, memoirs, which are sort of like an autobiography about your own life, letters, those sorts of things are all literature. Okay, so written text. So something to be literary, for example, Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet is a literary text. It is part of literature. Okay, so as long as you remember that that word literary means written text or a written work, then you're already halfway there. Now, when we combine the word literary with value, we all know what value means. It means important, significant, cherished, of great importance, it's valuable or it's highly regarded, it's got some considerable merit. So when you combine the two things, we're talking about literary value. What that basically means is it refers to written works that are significant and highly regarded. Now, who are they highly regarded by? Well, they're highly regarded by readers, audiences, societies, civilizations. These are texts that are important not just to an individual person, but they have some sort of universal appeal. Okay, and I'm not talking about the universe in a literal way. I'm not saying that every single person must value this text. I'm talking about a generalization that generally most people value this particular text. Okay, so a lot of the time they'll be referred to as classics. Now, a classic is usually a book or a play that has stood the test of time. Okay, so it is a book or a play it's sort of like a bit of a cultural phenomenon. It is well known, whether you've read it or not, you might have heard of the title, you might have heard of the characters within the play or the characters within the novel. It's sort of common cultural knowledge. Okay, so that is an example of a text that would be considered a classic. So to be a classic, it's generally more than 50 to 80 years old. There are some books that we know that will be classics in the future. For example, Harry Potter. That could be considered a modern classic. Whereas and the reason why it's not a current classic is it really hasn't had the time to withstand multiple generations in order to meet the criteria of being considered a classic. Okay, so what determines whether a book is a classic and that it has value is generally it's withstood the test of time. Okay, so to withstand the test of time, it means to withstand changes in generations, societal changes in different attitudes. It's withstood world wars. It has withstood technological advancements. So to have literary value and be considered a classic, it usually has both universal and timeless appeal to readers and audiences today, and has in the past, and it will continue in the future. So some examples of that To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Oh, goodness me, I spelled her name wrong. 1984, An Animal Farm by George Orwell, Oliver Twist, A Christmas Carol, War of the Worlds, Lord of the Flies, Little Women, the list goes on. So there are many plays, many novels, many texts that are considered classics. Now, the reason why we're talking about this is because you actually need to prove to some extent that Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet has literary value because it has stood the test of time. So your actual essay question that you'll be answering is a scene question. And this is what it is. So what elements of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet enable it to stand the test of time? That's your exam question. So what you need to be able to do is go, okay, well, Romeo and Juliet is over 400 years old. People today in 2020 still want to read the play, watch the play, engage within it. A lot of people know about Romeo and Juliet. It is a cultural phenomenon. Okay, a lot of other things have taken inspiration from Romeo and Juliet and the Star-Crossed Lovers. So what you need to do is go, all right, well, what are the things that give Romeo and Juliet literary value? What are the elements? Okay, so the elements of literary value are the things that make it stand the test of time. So you might say, well, I think the sophisticated and the eloquent language, the beautiful similes, metaphors, the personification, the way that Shakespeare writes is one of the reasons why it has stood the test of time. And you could have a whole paragraph about that. Another thing you could talk about could be about themes. You might decide that talking about fate and free will is still a thing that modern audiences connect with today. We all question whether we have control over our own lives or not, and Shakespeare explores that through Romeo and Juliet. And you would use evidence from Romeo and Juliet that show that the play has elements of the theme of fate versus free will. Okay, and then you would be talking about how audiences love Romeo and Juliet because it explores that theme. You could do the same thing about love. You could do the same thing with conflict. You could do the same thing with individuals versus society. So there's plenty of things that you can talk about. You might decide that the characters are what makes people love Romeo and Juliet, and that's why it stood the test of time. You might like it because Juliet was essentially one of the first feminists. She was one of the first female characters to go against her father's wishes in the Elizabethan era, where most women, well, all women, not most, were subject to their father's will and what they wanted, and they weren't actually able to have their own life choices. And Juliet turns that on its head, and when she pursues love with Romeo rather than being married for political gain or for her family's advantage. So there's plenty of different ways that you can attack this essay, but you have to really understand what are the elements that you think make Romeo and Juliet stand the test of time. Why has it lasted 400 years? Don't tell me that it doesn't have literary value, because it clearly does. If it can survive 400 years and it's still being studied in 2020, it has to have elements that we can connect with. Some people say that it explores the human condition, so what it is to be a human. Okay, so the ups and downs of life, the things that we experience as human beings, love, loss, tragedy, all of the high points in life and all of the lows, and it explores through Romeo and Juliet and all the other characters what that experience is like. Okay, and that could be one of the things that you talk about. So Romeo and Juliet explores the human condition when it talks about themes of love, individual versus society, and conflict. Okay, you could write a whole essay on that. It's up to you the way that you go, but you have to understand that your essay is about literary value and why the play has stood the test of time. Okay, you will learn more about that in class coming up, but that is just a very brief understanding of literary value. Hope you learned something. Thanks.